Script, check. Stimulant, check.
I play a vampire in a TV show that shoots here in Atlanta. And I was born in Louisiana, so the South has a big place in my heart. The Gulf Coast, where I grew up, is seeing massive changes because of global warming. But in this part of the country, climate change is barely on the radar. And maybe that's because one of the most powerful groups here, Evangelical Christians, isn't on board. But people like Anna Jane Joyner are trying to change that. Anna Jane is part of a growing movement called Creation Care. It's led by young evangelicals who believe that God created the planet, but it's up to us to protect it.
We aren't the owners of this world. We're tenants, we're stewards. And so if you believe that God created this planet, then you should take care of it. You know,
and for the future generations, making sure that that's secured. And
yeah, exactly. So it's this kind of growing movement within Christianity.
Anna Jane is on a mission to rally other evangelicals to the cause, including megachurches like this one. And she's found that the key to winning over a congregation is often the pastor.
It's with the heart man believes that it results in righteousness, not just the head, but with the heart. It's who we are.
Rick Joyner is the head of Morning Star Ministries, one of the most socially conservative churches in the state. He's a complete skeptic when it comes to climate change. For Anna Jane, getting him to change his mind will be a unique challenge because he also happens to be her father.
Isn't that an encouraging thought? We're all gonna die.
Sorry. I've spent a lot of my time as a correspondent for 60 Minutes investigating corporate scandals or chasing down the latest political scoop.
Leslie. Stahl.
But in the fast-paced world of TV news, something like climate change that happens over decades rather than hours can take a back seat. But we're now being told that what we used to think was so far off may actually be in the here and now. And that makes me wonder what the world will be like for my grandchildren. I've heard plenty about melting glaciers and rising seas, but I'm quickly learning that I don't know the half of it. The scientists here are telling me lots of things that scare me.
Thanks.
And it turns out that one of the scariest things of all is what's underneath all the melting ice.
Everything we thought we knew on climate change has actually been underestimated. So the effects of climate change will be upon us faster or intense fashion than we had thought.
We all know that human activities are changing the atmosphere in unexpected and in unprecedented ways.
That the greenhouse effect has been detected, and it is changing our climate now.
The atmosphere and ocean have warmed. The amounts of snow and ice have diminished. Sea level has risen. and the concentrations of greenhouse gases
There is no more fire season. We have wildfires all year round.
Climate change, extreme weather, call it what you will, and our vulnerability to it.
The 12 years of drought has left the landscape bone dry.
We got any patriots in the crowd?
A new scientific report has determined the last decade was the warmest on record.
Our world is changing faster and more dramatically than ever before.
Anna Jane Joyner is part of a new generation of evangelicals who are trying to change the climate debate. She sees no conflict between her faith and the science of climate change.
Coming together to help protect God's creation.
In fact, she thinks churches have a moral responsibility to take a stand on this issue. Why would you say evangelicals, particularly in this country, have been so skeptical about climate change?
Well, I think there's a general skepticism around science often. You know, most evangelicals or many evangelicals don't believe in evolution. For me, it's more of a personal, here is this community that raised me, and I want to believe that they can be on the right side of history on this one. You know, evangelicals have the most political power. They're huge, a huge political base.
Huge.
So let's go for the evangelicals, and once we can mobilize them, then it's this huge shift.
And she wants to mobilize them for a specific cause. Anna Jane is part of a major effort by the Sierra Club called Beyond Coal to shut down the coal plant here in Asheville, along with hundreds of others across the country. Why does this matter? To find out, I meet with Marianne Hitt, the national director of the campaign. She tells me that coal is the biggest source of CO2 emissions on the planet, including 30% of the emissions in the US alone.
So the amount of carbon coming out of this thing is equivalent to about, what is it?
500,000 cars every year.
Explain, if you will, your progress coming from the beginning to now and to the end goal.
There are about 500 coal plants in the country. We have one retirement of 149 coal plants just since 2010. And our goal by 2015, in 5 years, is we want to win the retirement of a third of the coal plants in America, and we are going to get there.
So the one thing I keep hearing is that switching over to renewables, aren't these electric bills going to skyrocket?
New clean energy that's coming online is actually in some places cheaper than existing coal plants like this one. So one example,
where would that be?
Montana. Recently a new wind farm came online, and it is cheaper than the existing coal plant, the coal strip plant in Montana. So we're in a whole new era in how we make energy in America. The path to a clean energy future is...
Beyond Coal is one of the most ambitious and successful efforts out there to actually do something about climate change. But in some places in the South, they're meeting resistance. And that's where Anna Jane comes in. Marianne has asked her to line up support from local pastors.
We already have several pastors in town who have signed on, and we haven't even really begun to get it out there to our different faith leaders. So I'm really excited there. We're at the table.
It's great work. It's really important. The science is important and the graphs and the charts are important, but if we leave out the moral element, we miss the opportunity to connect with people, and I think that's one of the things that we need to do most when it comes to climate change.
Anna Jane spends her days making the rounds at local churches, trying to get even more Christians on board for an upcoming Beyond Coal rally.
It's something I think that the faith community, were they to get mobilized around this issue, could bring a really prophetic voice to. I came across a wealth of information about how Christians are are not only called to care for the environment, but instructed to steward the land.
In the process, she can't help but think of her father.
My dad could tell you the verse. I can't, but it says, God will destroy those who destroy the earth.
And just like her father, some pastors seem impossible to convince.
You seem to think that I'm going down a wrong path.
You think I'm going down a wrong path. Let's understand, you came in here with the assumption that I'm wrong, that I'm an old guy who doesn't know what I'm talking about, and that I'm wrong. I think you're wrong. I get your worldview shoved down my throat 24 hours a day.
Very few Christians really believe in the resurrection. What they believe in is a doctrine of the resurrection.
Anna Jane has been fighting with her dad about climate change for years, and finally winning him over would mean a lot to her personally. But it would also be one of the biggest things she could do for the cause. That's because Rick Joyner isn't just any pastor. He's the head of an evangelical empire. His 50-acre compound was previously owned by Jim and Tammy Faye Baker, whose TV show, The PTL Club, once had an audience of over 600,000.
But the Bible says, greater is he that's in you than he that's in the world. And the devil came against
Now, Rick has turned it into the headquarters of a global ministry with 200 churches in 40 countries.
How many of these have you written?
Over 50. This one, I've got a movie, I had a movie deal on it.
This is amazing. I mean, this is like it's like a whole city in here.
Yeah, we have a school here and Morningstar University, and we have other churches. And
politically, Rick is about as far to the right as they come on a range of issues.
Prophetic perspectives on current events with Rick Joyner.
I'm leaning towards believing the election was stolen. It wasn't stolen from Romney, it was stolen from the American people. The system is so broken, so undermined right now, the whole system. I believe our only hope is a military takeover, martial law.
So far, Anna Jane hasn't been able to get her dad to budge. But now, she's planning to call in some help.
So we are leaving from here, Ulmanak.
I came to Greenland to meet glaciologist Marco Tedesco. When it comes to the effect climate change is having on the Arctic, he says what most people know is just the tip of the iceberg. And the only way to really appreciate what's happening here is to see it.
There's been a lot of melting now going on here. It's really up to the pilot to decide the safety level of our landing. We might want to be very careful when we walk around.
We do want to be very careful.
Well, but also because on the ice, any little problem can become very big.
I'm surprised by how big Greenland is, more than 3 times the size of Texas. Marco tells me that about 80% of it is covered in ice.
We study Greenland from space. We see how things evolve, but it's like a jungle. This is really unknown, unexplored territory.
Marco is one of a handful of scientists who spend weeks every year living on the ice, trying to figure out how fast it's disappearing.
So shall we try to find a landing spot on the top here?
The setting is stunning, and the glacier is far bigger than I ever imagined.
You can see this wall of ice all broken down. The glaciers, they lose mass by melting. So as there's more and more water produced, it goes through the ice and it breaks the ice. You have all the water into these multiple millions of cracks you see there. The cracks are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then these blocks are produced and they flow to the ocean. And these are very powerful events.
But just looking doesn't give you the full experience of what's happening here.
What am I supposed to be listening for?
Well, you will listen when the glacier is producing these icebergs. It really has this deep, loud, low tone sound. It's
like a rumble?
Like a rumble, or it's like an ice quakes, as we call them.
Ice quakes?
Yeah, there are ice quakes.
So if we just stand here, we'll actually hear something?
We will. It's right on the other side.
Oh my God, that was huge.
Something big going on the other side.
And then Marco tells me why these ice quakes scare him so much. Greenland is melting at a pace that is hard to fathom, 5 times faster than it was just 20 years ago. And in just 1 year, 2012, the ice that melted in Greenland was equivalent to Niagara Falls running into the ocean for 5 straight years, leading to more and more sea level rise. But it's not just these giant chunks of ice breaking off glaciers that concern Marco. There's another change here that's even more alarming.
I grew up in this church. My dad started it when I was around, I don't know, 6, 7 maybe. They started it out of their home, and it quickly grew.
I promise to honor God, nature, and our families.
The highest purpose of man is to love God above all things, and then to love one another.
But Anna Jane found her own purpose in college. She was at the University of North Carolina when she started learning about the impact of climate change and decided to major in environmental communications.
And I just came out really like for environmental protection, essentially took on this whole new life identity and role. And it was very not comfortable or familiar to the evangelical Christian world. And so it created a lot of tension between me and my dad. He actually did end up in the midst of these big arguments, cutting off my tuition for that semester.
So you're done?
Yeah.
Well, I was having a moral struggle, feeling like I'm investing in having my daughter's mind corrupted, you know? And that's the way I felt what was happening, because it was...
From the university, you mean?
Yeah. I think I can't pay to have this done to my daughter.
After not speaking for 6 months, Anna Jane and her father reconciled. But they never really settled their climate debate.
I understand the science, and I still haven't been convinced by the science. I'm open to it. I'm not totally unconvinced either, but I see, you know, some things that don't add up and some things that seem to me to be quite exaggerated.
But since her dad won't listen to her, Anna Jane is determined to find someone that Rick will listen to. Someone who shares his religious and political views, but who also accepts that climate change is real. Bob Inglis, a former Republican congressman from South Carolina, represented one of the nation's most conservative districts for 6 terms. Once a climate change skeptic, Inglis now makes it his mission to teach fellow Republicans and fellow Christians about the dangers of human-caused global warming.
From the perspective of people of faith, there is a contest here, right, between faith and science. My view is that God wants us to discover the way that he created. He wants us to discover the intricacies. He says, come on, I'll show you. But I understand some people of faith don't think that. They think, no, that's to invade the province of God to go there. And so with climate change, what some people think is that it's arrogant of humankind to say that we can affect the longevity of the earth.
Copy you, okay.
Because to do so is to invade the province of God.
Getting to this seat right now around this table, where are you on climate change?
I mean, I'm really not trying to prove climate change or disprove it.
Right.
I want to go at it. I want to know the truth.
How do you find what the truth is if you can, on the web, find a series of things that support doubt and, in fact, increase doubt? Or you can go a different series of steps and find increasing reliance on the science. And it just depends on...
I try to read both sides. Whenever I try to read the pros and the cons. The ones that were pro the study were, I thought, really superficial. I thought, what do they think, we're idiots?
Well, we all know this.
Bob Inglis has had some success bringing other conservatives around on climate change, but I'm not so sure it's working with Pastor Rick.
How is it you watching your daughter, who's ultimately devoted her life to this? I mean, how does that impact you? I mean, does that...
Well, it has an emotional impact, no doubt. I would like to believe for her sake. I'm doing this for her sake, but I still have to have a devotion to truth, or I'm not doing anything for her sake.
I guess I shouldn't be surprised that it's going to take more than one conversation with a fellow Christian to change Rick's mind. But it feels like a start. And now, Anna Jane has another idea. Maybe it would help if her dad could see the effects of global warming with his own eyes. So she's taking him to the Gulf Coast, where an entire way of life is threatened, partly because of climate change.
I love the Gulf. Having spent so many summers down there, to me, it's like another home.
I'm excited.
We're crossing into Florida.
Hey.
For Anna Jane, the trip has to be a success. The stakes couldn't be higher.
I'm an environmental advocate. I fight climate change. I think it is the most important issue of our time. This is my job. If I can't convince my dad that that's the case, then it's a very personal failure.
Wow.
Welcome.
This is a lake?
Yeah.
This is a lake. I can't get over it.
You can see we are really in a basin, and all the water starts collecting here. And you can see really these cracks here. You see,
you mean underneath?
You can see, definitely.
Yeah.
What you're seeing is that the water has been flushing away the snow. The number of lakes is actually increasing. So the more lakes means the more blue material, and the darker the ice sheet becomes, you really change the way the sun is driving the climate. The glacier is very bright, ice is very bright. When you replace a bright surface like this with a dark surface like that, it's like wearing a black shirt versus wearing a white shirt. It warms up faster.
Once we're back in the helicopter, I see that there are hundreds of these lakes. I'm witnessing a vicious cycle. The lakes cause more warming, which leads to more lakes and even more warming. And it's not just glaciers on land that are melting. Since 1980, an astonishing 40% of the summer sea ice in the Arctic has disappeared and been replaced by dark ocean. Over the last 30 years, all these new dark surfaces have caused more warming than the carbon dioxide emissions of all the cars on the entire planet. And remember, this melting is being driven by the coal, oil, and gas we've already burned. But of course, we're burning more all the time. Back in New York, I learn of a new report issued by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. For the first time, this group of top climate scientists from around the world is declaring an upper limit on the amount of fossil fuels we can burn without courting a catastrophe. Dr. Heidi Cullen is one of the authors of the report. Now, in this new report, what do you think the most important new statement is?
Yeah, I would say that the most important new statement in this report was the red line that scientists drew in the sand. Basically, we can't touch more than 30% of our reserves, so we are going to have to leave some oil and gas on the table if we are really committed to preserving, the vital functions of our planet. So in the same way that cigarette smoking raises your risk for lung cancer, burning fossil fuels raises the risk of, harming the important organs of our planet, our ocean, our atmosphere, our ice sheets.
Heidi tells me if we were to burn all our known reserves of fossil fuels, humans would find large parts of the planet unlivable outdoors. So clearly we have to stop far short of that. She says it's all a question of how much risk we want to take. And scientists around the world agree that if we burn more than 30% of our known reserves, the risk becomes unacceptable.
If we don't do anything differently, we're going to cross that mark by 2040. We're talking about more extreme weather events, more flooding, droughts, heat waves, rising sea levels, all of these things that just really up our risk.
2040.
2040. I'll still be here, hopefully.
I might not, but my children will be. My grandchildren will be. We've heard these clarion calls for a long time, actually. Now, you and I might believe it, but go out in the street.
The job of the scientist is really to, hold up a danger sign and say, look, burning fossil fuels, while there's many great things about it, it has these unfortunate long-term risks. As scientists, we can't tell oil companies what to do or what not to do, but we can say that, it is tremendously risky to go after all of that oil and natural gas. If that we willingly choose to cross that line, then don't say that you haven't been warned.
And then there's a final twist, one that's straight out of a climate scientist's nightmare. As the ice melts in the Arctic, entirely new deposits of oil and gas that were once trapped under the ice are becoming accessible for the first time. I've just learned that we can't afford to burn the fossil fuel reserves we know about, and yet energy companies are on the hunt for even more of the stuff.
It really is the ultimate irony. As we burn fossil fuels, we warm the planet. The warming melts the ice, and that just makes all of these natural resources more accessible to fossil fuel companies to extract, which then further warms the planet. So we're really locked in this vicious cycle.
Apalachicola has long been the oyster capital of Florida. Not long ago, this one bay produced 10% of all the oysters in the United States. But in the last year, oyster revenues are down by almost half. It's gotten so bad that the U.S. Secretary of Commerce officially declared a disaster in the region.
You're not doing it for what people...
To help explain what's happening here, Anna Jane asked Catherine Hayhoe, one of the world's leading climate scientists, to join her and Rick.
Hey! Hi, nice to meet you.
Anna Jane, nice to meet you.
Hey, I'm Rick.
Catherine.
Good to meet you.
You too.
Catherine isn't just a climate scientist. She's also a devout evangelical, the daughter of Christian missionaries, and she's married to a conservative evangelical preacher.
And the funny thing is that when we first got married, it wasn't until after we got married that we realized that he didn't think climate change was real. So we actually spent like the first, probably about the first year or two of being married arguing through a lot of scientific issues. The way I think of science is I feel like I'm actually studying what God was thinking when he put the earth together. And so I feel like there is truth in looking at creation. When I see all these things changing, we have a good sense of how things have changed in the past, how it's gotten warmer and cooler, and how we've seen different cycles in the past. And the things we're seeing right now don't fit any of those molds.
For Rick, this is a chance to learn about science from someone who shares his faith.
When you look at the observations, what we see is that, first of all, the Earth's temperature goes up and down all the time. It goes up and down from year to year, and it goes up and down over time. What we also see, though, is right now it's going up very steadily over 20 or 30 years. So when you look at the planet right now, the ocean is warming, the atmosphere is warming, the land surface is warming, every part of the land and the ocean, the atmosphere is warming. And we also see that all of the natural reasons why climate has changed in the past right now, it's like volcanic eruptions and solar cycles, natural cycles, would be causing us to cool. Instead, we're warming. So we know that we're burning coal and gas and oil. We know that. We know that it produces carbon dioxide. We know that the carbon dioxide is building up in the atmosphere. When we add extra carbon dioxide, it's like wrapping an extra blanket around the Earth. And it keeps the Earth warm exactly the way a jacket or a blanket keeps us warm. It reflects our body heat back to us. So that's why we know it's us that is driving climate change today. It's because we should be getting cooler right now, and we're not.
Rick doesn't look convinced, but if he has any questions for Catherine, he's not even bothering to ask.
Hello, how you doing?
Hello. Hi, I'm Anna Jane.
Hi, my name's
Pleasure.
Pleasure.
Hey, Ken.
Yes.
Yep. The last hurricane it broke off. And you push the boat. And then before the boat swings back, so I can cover as much ground as possible, I'll grab my foot and start filling the bottom looking for oysters again, and I think I might get one. Maybe.
This is why we quit walking this winter.
Yeah, this is why we quit.
Longtime oysterman Ken Folsom and his son Joe are struggling to hold on to a dying way of life.
Nothing. Nothing. And now you have to understand, statistically, this was the most productive bar in the entire western side of the bay. This is where everybody dreamed to come. This is where everybody oystered. I've oystered for 30 years. I raised a family, you know. I mean, the oysters were as big as my foot.
The problem is the water. Apalachicola is right between the Gulf of Mexico, which is saltwater, and a series of freshwater rivers and lakes. It's the perfect habitat for oysters. But droughts in this part of the country have been getting more severe, and climate change will make them even worse. 3 straight years of drought and a rise in water use upstream have drastically reduced the flow of fresh water. As a result, the salinity of the water in Apalachicola Bay is too high, and on top of that, climate change is causing the sea level to rise, which will bring in even more salt water.
So oysters need this perfect mix of saltwater and freshwater to grow. And then in recent years, the freshwater has been less and less of it because of the drought and because of people needing the water upstream, right?
That's correct. I understand.
Yeah, and then you got sea level rising, and then climate change is messing up our rainfall patterns too.
I'm sitting here thinking, yeah, but we live right up the coast here, and I don't see the water rising. You know, we haven't seen it there. You know, these are definitely worthy considerations to search out. Is this the cause? I mean, I'm very interested to hear somebody's perspective who's been on the water this long, and I think he's the type of guy that really needs to be heard.
Yeah,
and you need to have.
I'm an early warning because it's impacting me now. It's probably going to impact you tomorrow. So it's kind of like, I mean, I hate to say it because I'm not a really religious person, but it's kind of like it said in the Bible where all the fish would die in the ocean. You know, it's happening. This is one of the last pristine bays left in the entire United States. It just breaks my heart to see it being killed. And I feel so powerless to do anything about it.
There's an oil rush in the Arctic. As the ice melts every country with a stake in the region wants in on the game. Russia, Norway, Iceland, Canada, the United States, and Greenland are all believed to be sitting on a treasure trove of undiscovered oil worth trillions of dollars.
America needs our oil, and when Alaska is strong and when we produce, it helps keeps the country strong. We send less money overseas.
Meade Treadwell is the lieutenant governor of Alaska. He says drilling in the Arctic is America's best opportunity to end its dependence on foreign oil. But I wonder if he thinks about the other consequences of fossil fuels.
Some of the most important scientists are warning that we have to stop the drilling and exploring for more oil and gas. They're saying that it's going to be a catastrophe for the environment.
Well, I guess I'd ask you this. Do you drive a car?
No.
Do you ever ride in a car? Of course
Gotcha.
I mean,
No.
the point
Go
is I got here in a jet that was fueled by a fossil fuel. Let's say you're right and let's say they're right, okay? Then the question is, can you put the toothpaste back in the tube?
No, but we can not make it worse. We
Well-
can take steps to not exacerbate what's
Okay,
already
so
happened.
you're going to quit flying, you're going to quit driving. I mean, the fact is that we're going to be using fossil fuels for some time. I don't believe holding Alaska energy off the market is good for the country. Canada, Greenland for Denmark, Iceland, Norway, Russia, we are all competing for investment dollars. I was in the room with Vladimir Putin a few years ago where he was talking about a deal he'd made with Exxon where he expects $350 billion worth of investment flowing through
to
that
find
particular deal.
oil and gas.
To find and produce it, yeah. And so we are all in a competition to, because we're basically appearing in the same boardrooms around the world. You know, Exxon invests in many of our different countries. ConocoPhillips invests in many of these different countries. And so the question is, which Arctic region will win that investment battle?
And that battle includes Greenland. They're on the front lines of global warming. Ice is part of their national identity, and I expected them to be outraged by the dramatic changes that are happening here. But instead, just like everyone else, they see the melting ice as an opportunity. Over the past several years, oil companies have been spending billions of dollars to lease giant tracts of offshore real estate here just so they can look for oil. I want to ask Greenland's Prime Minister, Aleika Hammond, what that kind of money would mean for a relatively poor country of just 57,000 people.
I have a map so that you and I can look at the map that shows just what we're talking about. So this is Greenland, obviously. And this is where all the oil exploration is going on. That looks like a huge swath of real estate out there.
The new oil around the world to be found in the future is in Greenland.
Do you know how much the oil companies are already spending for this exploration out there?
A lot of dollars.
More, am I right, than the gross national product of Greenland?
Yes.
They're spending more than the whole economy of Greenland just to find this oil out there. And if they find it, every citizen of Greenland will benefit in some way.
Yes, of course. Otherwise, we didn't do that.
There are environmentalists who would want you not even to develop the oil.
It's important to let these environmentalists know that this is not a museum. This is not a new frontier where you can just make a new treaty saying that this is not to be touched. People live here. We have a word to say. If we are not to become victimized in this climate change issue, it's important as a politician we find other options for income as a people.
Okay, so y'all tell me about your trip.
It was awesome.
It was a great trip. A lot of fun. Learned a lot. thought I'd get the ultimate answer, is climate change for real or not? And I didn't. You know, sorry that it seemed like she came just automatically assuming this is climate change and this is damage
She wasn't
by
assuming
climate
it, Dad. She studies it.
Well,
That's what she does for a living.
Yeah,
That's not
I
an
know-
assumption.
I know,
There
but
is
still-
copious research that indicates that climate change is making droughts worse. And that's something that's only going to get worse as our life, like within my lifetime. It's going to become an increasingly more difficult problem for people to have fresh water.
That's an assumption.
It's not
And
an assumption, Dad. There's solid scientific evidence.
Well,
that
I've heard that so much, but nobody's presented that solid scientific evidence, in my opinion.
Well, it just seems to me like you're looking for reasons not to believe it.
Well,
And
I don't think I was. Maybe I am.
It's not unlike, you can't link cancer to cigarettes 100%, but you wouldn't give your 10-year-old child a pack of cigarettes because there's some measure of uncertainty.
Well,
that's...
we've had cases in history where 99% of the people believe one thing and they were totally wrong.
Dad, I would bet my life on the fact that history will say that this is a problem and we could have done something about it. And right now, you're in the camp that's not doing anything about it.
Well,
do you really want to be in that camp?
I want to be in the camp of the truth.
I'm
really
saying
want
I
the
would
truth.
bet my life on it.
Yeah, but
right now,
see, that's an emotional
No, it's
persuasion.
not emotion. I have
It still
studied the
doesn't give me the
science.
facts.
I
hear
just
that-
set you up with one of the most renowned climate scientists in the world. You weren't willing to hear the facts.
I think I was.
We are constantly, constantly coming up to our parents, to our friends, who are just looking the other way.
Well, if you're going to err, which side we want to err on? We wouldn't even be having this conversation if you weren't our daughter.
I just really encourage you to put some energy into doing the research, because you don't want to be on the side that said I had a chance and I didn't do anything.
It turns out not everyone is content to stand by and watch the Arctic become the next Saudi Arabia. Greenpeace is campaigning all over the world to make the Arctic a no-drilling zone. This past September, 30 Greenpeace activists crashed an oil rig owned by energy giant Gazprom. Some of them ended up spending 3 months in a Russian prison as a result. They seem willing to do almost anything to place this issue on the world stage.
The climate is changing. There are dangers, but there are also opportunities.
I'd never heard of the Arctic Council. It's sort of a polar UN. This assembly of Arctic nations has been meeting for almost 2 decades without much fanfare. But lately, these meetings have taken on a new urgency.
Today, the Arctic is receiving unprecedented international attention.
The Arctic has become part of world politics as we never saw before.
Today, as Secretary of State, I come here keenly aware that the long list of challenges, ice melt, rising sea levels, and indiscriminate development practices, all of these carry even more challenges downstream, so to speak, to each of our economies, to our national security, and to international stability. What happens here touches every single person around the world and our way of life.
But even though the Council has issued numerous reports on the threat climate change poses to the region, they are doing nothing to stop the mad rush for fossil fuels. And I'm curious what John Kerry thinks of all this. He's been sounding the alarm on climate change for decades. As a senator, he tried for years to make fossil fuel companies pay for the right to dump heat-trapping gases into the atmosphere. He failed, thanks in part to a $500 million lobbying campaign by energy companies.
So as a person who has been an advocate on this issue forever, for decades now, It doesn't bother you that, I guess, the Energy Department gives out hundreds of permits to oil companies to dig in the Alaskan Arctic? Does it bother you?
Sure, it bothers me. Of course it does. How could it not bother you if you accept the scientific facts that I've said I accept?
Right.
Of course it bothers me, which is why the Obama administration has issued new restraints on coal-fired power plants, new power sources. We've got new standards for automobiles, trucks. I mean, we're doing things, but frankly, we need a major shift in the response of the United States Congress and the American people to how we're going to provide our energy.
Why not just stop giving out permits right now for drilling and looking for more oil and more resources in the Arctic?
Because it's not the looking for it or the drilling right now that's going to make the difference. You can't cut it off without an alternative. If you were getting an analyst's report in a company and you were saying to them, what's your advice about where our energy is going to come from in 15 or 20 years, because of the slowness of the political system to respond, because of the power of some of those companies to prevent it from happening fast, you'd bet on the fact that you're going to have the status quo in the next few years. And that's why the money is chasing that future.
So there's no policy to say the oil and gas in the Arctic should stay where it is. We shouldn't dig it up.
There's no policy yet. When I was early involved in the environment efforts back in 1970, when we had the first Earth Day and 20 million Americans came out and said, we want to change, they also unelected a bunch of people in Congress, and that's how we got a Clean Air Act, Safe Drinking Water, Marine Mammal Protection, all those acts happened. We even created the EPA out of that. That's what we need again. We need grassroots movement. We need Americans to be demanding of their public officials that we have a responsible energy policy.
As Anna Jane keeps thinking about how to convince her father, Rick is busy doing his own research and finds all sorts of information that confirms his worldview and attacks the science. In reality, the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, the American Medical Association, and hundreds of scientific organizations around the world have established that climate change is real, that humans are mainly responsible, and that the impacts will be severe. But none of that seems to have an impact on Rick.
On a global scale, when you start compiling the findings of thousands of scientists, all roads inexorably lead to the Earth is warming because of CO2 emissions.
Well,
That's
one thing, there is information out there that counters almost everything, and it is scientific information. Would you let me bring the evidence against it and present it? Which I've not yet had any climate proponent or climate change proponent be willing to listen to.
A fair request. So I start looking for a scientist who'd be willing to hear Rick out. And I think I found the perfect person. Someone who actually used to see things the same way Rick does. And in fact, he used to be one of the most influential climate deniers in the country.
I'm going to be talking about climate change, at which I was indeed a skeptic.
For years, Dr. Richard Muller's research was funded in part by fossil fuel billionaires Charles and David Koch, who have funded numerous client denial efforts. But then in 2012, he flipped. Now, Dr. Muller tries to convince what he calls sophisticated skeptics, people like Rick Joyner.
One of the problems with science, I've got all kinds of stuff here that question the science. I'm not going to say they disprove.
You mean as a whole, the science as a whole?
Problems with the math, problems with the psychology, problems with the politics, and there's some definite hypocrisy.
We talked for over 3 hours.
Is it more politically motivated? And if so, what are the politics? There can be other factors, many other factors causing a seeming decrease in temperatures. Is CO2 really the factor that we thought it was?
Pastor Rick laid out all the reasons he doubted climate change, and Dr. Muller responded with the findings of his investigation.
When we started this work 3 years ago, it wasn't clear to me that the temperatures had risen. So the thermometer data was important.
So what did you do?
I felt we had to start from the beginning, analyze the data ourselves, we were able to derive a temperature curve that starts in 1753.
So will you show us this?
Yeah, let me show you. Here's the plot. So this light line that bounces up and down is our temperature record going back to 1753.
The curve showed a steady rise in temperature during the industrial age, but there was something puzzling. There were also a series of sudden drops in temperature. So Dr. Muller and his team looked for an explanation.
And it turns out these drops in temperatures all match the known volcanic eruptions. And the fact that we could see these gave us that much more confidence that what we had done was right.
Volcanic eruptions cause the planet to cool because all the ash in the air blocks sunlight.
But we could see they were all very short-lived. Now, we got this gradual change comes all the way up here. What is that? There are many things that could cause an exponential rise, things unrelated to global warming theory. So we put in the solar variability. We have good records of sunspots, and I tried the solar variability. And finally, my former graduate student said, why don't you try the world population? I did that, and it was also not a very good fit.
After exhausting all the possible natural causes, Muller finally plugged in carbon dioxide.
In the end, the fit that I got best, the fit you see here, and this was a jaw-dropping experience, by far the best fit was when I put in the volcanoes and carbon dioxide. This was really the eureka moment. Global warming is real and caused by humans.
Is that consistent with ultimately right around when the Industrial Revolution happened, when we started spewing out copious quantities of CO2 to our...
Here there was a slight rise. That was mostly to the burning of wood.
Right.
And you get up here into the Industrial Revolution, it starts going up faster.
Starts climbing.
But you can look at the carbon in the atmosphere, and you can determine that it's fossil fuel.
So you've heard a lot of his arguments to your concerns and vice versa. What do you think now?
I still have questions. I mean, this hasn't resolved all of my answers, but he is really, at least, he showed me someone who I felt like had what I felt true science perspective. Most of my other ones, the problems with the psychology, with the politics.
You know, we can sit around and argue this till we all die, and that doesn't change the fact that it's real and that it's happening. And so at what point do we have to put aside the political and psychological and acknowledge that they're problematic and we need to address them, but just really take the science for what it is?
Since my trip to the Arctic, the fossil fuel rush has continued. Greenland recently granted new exploration licenses to some of the most powerful oil companies in the world, including Chevron, ConocoPhillips, and BP. And for the first time, the Russians have struck oil in the Arctic and have begun drilling.
What does it make you think?
Since I got here, I've had this very sad feeling that it's going away. It upsets me. What do you feel when you look out and see this ice and you know it's retreating?
Well, one of the things that I always think about the ice is that I think about it as an elephant.
Elephant?
Yeah, you see the skin of the elephant? It looks like a little bit like this. It's huge, it's big, it's strong, but it's very quiet, it doesn't harm. And it's scared by the mouse, and it's retreating. And the mouse is us, actually. We're small, but we are very powerful. And the elephant is scared and is retreating by us.
After almost a decade listening to his daughter argue the case for climate change, Pastor Rick Joyner still isn't fully convinced. But he has gained enough respect for Anna Jane to let her speak directly to his congregation and let them decide.
These people on the far right are incredibly influential in a lot of cases. And if you can move a couple of them, you can really change the game.
His love makes us whole. This is a healing conference. You getting healed? You know, there are a lot of levels of healing. There are a lot of different kinds of healing. And tonight, my daughter's going to start talking about a little bit tonight about healing the land.
And here are just some of the different biblical narratives that I came across that speak to caring for the earth. 1 Corinthians 1:26 said, "For the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof." Leviticus says, "The land is mine and you are but my aliens and my tenants." Climate disruption is not a political issue. It's a moral issue. It's a justice issue. Even more than that, it's a spiritual issue. And if and when Christians do engage, there will be a great deal of healing, not just of the land, but of our relationships with the land, with each other, and with God. I ask you, people of God, please don't sit this one out. Who better to lead this than Christians? Believers in the great hope, believers in resurrection, believers in salvation, even against all odds. Thank you.